Well, thank you all for coming. And Dr. Krippner is here now. And I first met Dr. Krippner in 2009. And from then on, I've been amazed getting him to know a little more about him each year. If you know, his fellow of 4 APA divisions, numerous awards, I think a couple honorary doctorates. And if you have a spare hour or so, you can read up on him on Google. Yeah. But one thing that I'm always impressed with Dr. Krippner with is just a gentleman and a very decent man. So a gentleman and a scholar. And he's an expert in dreams, and he's going to tell us all about it right now. Thanks, Dr. Krippner.
Well, thank you so much, and it's delightful to see folks bright and shiny so early in the morning. And I hope I don't put you to sleep, because I'm going to talk about dreams and finding meaning in dreams. Now, this is especially appropriate for a conference on meaning, because as all of you know, what separates human beings from other life forms in our world is that they search for meaning and cannot tolerate ambiguous stimuli. There has to be some meaning behind it, and of course, meaning served an evolutionary purpose. People who saw no meaning in their lives, who saw no meaning in the universe, took risks, didn't make plans, didn't care about their own safety. They died off, and their genes dropped out of the gene pool. So, when people were faced with the fact that they had strange experiences during the night, they had to find some meaning for those strange experiences. And in ancient times, the logical answer was, well, we were someplace else, we were in a different world, or we were visited by gods and goddesses. With the advent of more philosophical ways of thinking, other types of meaning became attributed, and I'm going to sort of give you a short history of that search right now. And can somebody tell me which button to press? Good. All right, so we can define dreams as a series of images, usually emotionally toned and expressed in narrative form, that occur during sleep. A dream report is a verbal, written, or pictorial representation of a dream. So, that'll be helpful. So, when we deal with dreams, we're never dealing with the phenomenological dream, the dream that was actually experienced. We're dealing with what we remember about the dream. And so technically, when we do dream research, we say that we are dealing with dream reports. So I'll be using the word dream more often than not this morning, but you know that I'm really talking about dream reports. The word dreaming, the verb, refers to the activity itself. Most dreams are not remembered, but that does not mean that a person has not been dreaming. Most, if not all, dreams occur in rapid eye movement sleep or REM sleep. The brain keeps active all night long, and it sort of has to keep active or it goes off base and doesn't function too well. But in Western cultures, dreams are not given the importance that they're given in traditional societies, and so it's not surprising that you hear people say, oh, I never dream. As a matter of fact, they simply do not remember their dreams. There have been a handful of people over the last few decades who have had a type of brain damage that interferes with the pons and other parts of the brain associated with REM sleep. And when you put them in a laboratory setting, literally they do not have REM sleep. However, they do function fairly well during the day. Why? Because mentation takes place during the night, and other brain activity sort of compensates for the lack of REM dreaming. As you know, the brain is marvelously plastic, and when one part conks out, very often another part takes over. Tribal shamans were the original dream interpreters, and they used a variety of procedures which were dependent on their time and place. Iroquois shamans, for example, believed that dreams reflected the secret desires of the heart, and they arranged for those secret desires of the heart to be expressed during dream festivals. This was sort of a safety valve for the community. Somebody might have a dream about wearing a very elegant cloak that a neighbor wore, and instead of taunting the neighbor or stealing the cloak, they were allowed to wear that cloak during the dream festival, and so they had the pleasure of wearing the cloak. Sometimes they coveted the neighbor's wife. Well, in some tribes among the Iroquois, yes, they had that neighbor's wife one night, and that defused the situation, and they went on their way. Unfortunately, it didn't work the other way if a woman had a dream about coveting somebody else's husband. But, you can't ask for everything in these dream festivals. Ancient seers in Greece, Rome, China, India, Egypt, and other parts of the world believed that dreams originated with deities and spirits. The literature of those times reflects this belief, especially in the Greek plays and the sagas of Homer, where dreams play a very important part and are actually sent by deities. In the 2nd century, Common Era, Artemidorus of Daldis wrote the first dream dictionary, a compendium of purported dream images, and you do see vestiges of that today in the dream dictionaries. However, Artemidorus made some room for individual differences, and so he did acknowledge that the universal meanings did sometimes have exceptions. Dream incubation temples were popular sites for pilgrims in the Eastern Mediterranean countries, where they would go, they'd spend the night, and if they were having a health problem, the god Aesculapius would come, usually in the form of a priest who was dressed up in the right costume, and give advice on health. I mean, the priest had to do this. If somebody didn't have the right dream or didn't remember the dream, people wouldn't come to his temple anymore. He'd go out of business. So there was a lot of trickery going on, but sometimes, as some shamans say, you've got to trick somebody into getting well. Also, we've noticed in exploring these temples, little holes just above the place where the person was sleeping, and it's thought that sometimes the priest would whisper suggestions through these holes, and people would hear it, and they would think that this was the voice of the gods. Well, those temples lasted over 1,000 years, so they certainly served a purpose. Aristotle and Cicero were separated by time and by space, but they're important because both attributed dreams to the mind of the dreamer and not to external sources such as gods and goddesses. Cicero even wrote an essay proposing rational ways to explain dreams about future events. So it was with the Greeks and the Romans that we have what we might consider the origins of dream science as it's practiced today. In the Christian world, a mistranslation of an Old Testament verse by St. Jerome in the 5th century stifled interest in dreams for nearly 1,000 years. He included those who work with dreams in a list of malevolent practitioners. Nobody knows why St. Jerome did this. Maybe he suffered nightmares, or maybe he had a wonderful dream that didn't come true. But he actually put people who work with dreams on the list of sorcerers and witches, and as I say, that stifled interest for a long time. Sometimes it was even so bad that the priests told the parishioners, well, if you remember a dream, don't pay any attention to it because it's the work of the devil, and the devil is trying to get into your mind. So dreams went into eclipse during the Middle Ages. But then during the Renaissance, the work of Artemidorus was rediscovered and was published under the title Ono Critica in 1518. And this book helped revive a scholarly interest in dreams. So that old ancient Greek text was rediscovered, as well were a number of other Greek and Roman texts during the Renaissance, and it did revive scholastic interest. In 1576, the British writer Thomas Hall published The Most Pleasant Art of the Interpretation of Dreams. The 17th century French philosopher René Descartes attributed the development of his philosophy to 3 revelatory dreams. This is very ironic because Descartes had these 3 remarkable dreams that inspired his philosophy, which was very rational and very logical, and he did not incorporate dreams into his philosophy. Superstition still abounded, however, with many Europeans ascribing sleep paralysis to molestation, to incubi and succubi, and this led to all sorts of artwork, like the one you see in this picture, a painting by the English artist Fuseli. It's not uncommon for people, and maybe you've had this experience, to feel a heavy weight on their chest as they're drifting into sleep or coming out of sleep. Well, this is easily explained from a psychophysiological point of view, but back in those days, again, they thought, well, this is the work of the devil, and many women claimed that the devil was trying to have sex with them, and they had all sorts of fantasies that were reported and had exorcisms because of a simple natural phenomenon. And then in 1893, the U.S. psychologist Mary Calkins lamented the lack of serious interest in dreams. And Mary Calkins is almost forgotten today, but we have to give her a lot of credit for saying it's about time we do some experiments with dreams. It's about time we take them seriously. It's about time we study them and find out their origins and their meaning. And then in 1899, the Austrian psychiatrist Sigmund Freud published The Interpretation of Dreams. His publisher was so sure that this would be a landmark volume that he dated the publication to 1900 to initiate the new century. Well, he was disappointed because a year later, only a few dozen copies of the book had been sold. It took a while for that book, which of course is a classic, for that book to catch on. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung differed with Freud, insisting that dream symbols and metaphors reveal rather than conceal. We talked about this in our workshop yesterday. And Jung and also Alfred Adler said that dreams use the best techniques that they can, namely symbols and metaphors, to reveal the everyday concerns of the dreamer. Dozens of major schools of dream interpretation abound today, and most can be categorized in 5 different ways. Dream interpretation based on universal meanings holds that dream imagery has a constant meaning throughout the world. But psychodynamic interpretation gears the meaning of symbols and metaphors to cultural and individual differences. In other words, there are still dream dictionaries, and they are selling only all too well. And they say, you dream about water, well, this means somebody's about to give birth in your family. And it's a simple way to interpret dreams, but almost always incorrect. Now, of course, psychodynamic interpretation does gear the interpretation to the dreamer and looks for meaning in symbols and metaphors. Basically put, symbols are images that have a deeper meaning. Metaphors are activities that have a deeper meaning. So if somebody dreams about a king, yes, that's an image. Maybe there's no king in the person's life, but the king could be a symbol for power, for authority, for arrogance, for one's boss at work, Or it might be more literal. It might be the future King of England or a past King of England. So sometimes the image is basically what it portends to be. Metaphors are activities, like running up a hill might be a metaphor for hurrying up and achieving one's goal, or being fatigued because of overwork. Or again, it might be more literal. Somebody might be in training for the marathon, and running up a hill is something that they might be doing every day. So sometimes the dream basically reflects what's happening in everyday life. And here's where we have the tragic cases of post-traumatic stress disorder nightmares. Because PTSD nightmares keep a person awake at night. They are so dreadful the person doesn't want to get to sleep because they're usually quite literal. And the brain is trying to process them, trying to put that emotion through the system, and it can't. The trauma was just too intense. And so the person dreams about the rape every night, the car accident every night, the combat casualties every night. Once they're able to put that into a symbol and a metaphor, then you know they're on the way to recovery, because finally they're able to download that emotion and process it. But until they can do that, PTSD survivors are literally stuck in their personal life, also in their dream life. And this is our major difference between PTSD nightmares and ordinary nightmares, which really aren't that unusual. People do process emotions during the dreams, and sometimes there's a very intense emotion to process, so intense that the dream wakes them up and they have an emotional reaction that's so severe that they consider it a nightmare, but more likely than not, they don't have that nightmare again for several nights, several months, or maybe never. Interpretation based on associations asks dreamers to provide a meaning, experience, or association for the images and activities in the dream. Gestalt interpretation assumes that each segment of the dream represents a part of the dreamer themselves. And so in Gestalt dream working, it's not uncommon, and I've done this myself with groups, for the dreamer to play each part of the dream and give the perspective of each part of the dream, not only the human characters, but animals, tables, chairs, lamps, waterfalls, etc. Because people like Fritz Perls thought that the dream consisted of different aspects of the dreamer themselves. However, there are other association techniques, Freud's free association being an example. And yesterday in our dream group, I introduced a process invented by Gail Delaney where one associates to the dreams in the simplest possible terms, and then the dream worker reads back that restatement of the dream, and more likely than not, it reflects something going on in the person's life. But something so complicated, a person has to put it into a package of symbols and metaphors to express it. And that's the wonderful thing about dreams. It's a remarkable example of packaging, where a lot of information can be put into a short package and can serve its purpose. Person-centered interpretation relies upon dreamers to evoke their own interpretations, either individually or as group members. One person-centered approach does not interpret the dream at all, but instead asks the dreamer to appreciate his or her dream as a piece of literature or as a work of art. Excuse me. And this is how our therapists often use a dream. They have somebody recreate the dream as a poem, as a play, as a sculpture with clay, or finger paint the dream. And once they've done that, the dream is expressed, and more often than not, the meaning is then fairly evident. One school of thought holds that dreams are actually spandrels, decorative aspects of the dreaming process that serve no adaptive purpose. However, other perspectives view dreaming as an important aspect of evolution, claiming that dreams assist memory consolidation, emotional downloading, creative problem solving, and rehearsing for future events. And there is a great deal of evidence from the laboratories supporting those functions of dreams. And so they were evolutionary, adaptive, and useful. Some of the best work in dreams is being done in Quebec, right here in Canada. And the laboratory work focuses on the emotions of dreams. Tori Nielsen and his associates have written article upon article showing the importance of downloading emotions in terms of dreams. Now here again, the post-traumatic stress disorder survivor that has nightmares is trying desperately to download those emotions. The brain is trying desperately to pass that through the system, but it can't. It's stuck because the trauma was just too intense. So downloading of emotion can't take place. Also, memory consolidation is a function of dreams. You learn a lot during the day, and the dream sort of discards what is not important, retains what is important. Here again, in PTSD nightmares, that memory cannot be consolidated because it's too intense and there's nothing to learn from it. And, or so it seems. So, one of the types of therapy for PTSD nightmares involves meaning. The person is ascribing the wrong meaning to the dream. A rape victim might be having a dream about the rape and his or her assailant, and gives that an overlay of irrational beliefs. Well, I brought it on myself. I should never have been there. I never should have associated with that person. I never should have dressed the way that I did. It was really all my fault. Well, you have to replace that irrational belief system with a more rational belief system, and upon awakening for such a dream, in which one is a victim with no power, one immediately puts a different ending on the dream and a different personal myth in the dream, saying it was not my fault, I was not responsible for that rape, and I'm going to come into my own power and I'm going to use that experience in a constructive way. Okay, that's the rational part. But then the emotional part involves going into the emotion of the dream, and you can't change a rape, it's already happened, but what you can do is have a fantasy. You can pull out a machine gun and gun down the rapist, or you can invent a torture chamber for the rapist, or you can simply zap and eradicate the rapist, or in some very, very rare cases, you can forgive the rapist. Most people aren't ready for forgiving at that stage of the game. That comes later. But you can do something where you have the power and the rapist does not have the power, and then acknowledge that. But then there's also behavior. How does this translate into behavior? Some people join a rape crisis center. Some people counsel friends, warning them about how to avoid being raped or sympathizing with them if they're raped as well. In the United States, the statistics are very grim. 1 out of every 3 women is not raped necessarily, but is molested verbally or physically at some time in her life. That's a lot of nightmares, a lot of material to process. In the U.S. military, rape is rampant, and one of the dirty secrets of the U.S. military is that more men are raped than women in the Army, on combat and off base. They don't admit it because of the shame and the guilt, and again they have the nightmares because of it. But again, seizing the power after the nightmare and reconstructing the nightmare, you can't reconstruct the act, but you can reconstruct the meaning. One of the most important lessons that has come out of my work with PTSD is emphasized, much to my delight. The co-authored book on PTSD is in the bookstore. We start off the book by going back to the Greek philosopher Epictetus, who said, it's not what happens to us that's important, it's how we react what happens to us that's important. In other words, how we put meaning into what has happened to us. Well, so it is with the dream. The rape, the combat casualty, the near drowning, the murder of a close friend that one was witnessing, all of those are horrendous events. But what meaning do you put to it? You can put the meaning, oh, there's no justice in the world. Why did God allow this to happen? Why didn't I prevent it? Why wasn't I killed? No, that's all irrational thinking. That's a reaction to an event which is inappropriate, irrational, and the recipe for nightmares. This is where, independently or with a counselor or psychotherapist, a person learns to ascribe new meaning to the traumatizing event. And slowly, over time, if a person works on it, rehearses during the day as well as after the nightmare wakes them up, the nightmare will change. There are some very, very good therapies for nightmares. I recommended yesterday the writings of Barry Croker, Kroker, and also the work of Judith Davis, Davis, both of whom have written books on post-traumatic stress disorder nightmares. Now, what about rehearsal for future activities? Again, for the PTSD survivor, the future is very glum. They don't see much of a future. And this is where Philip Zimbardo's new book on time perspective therapy takes place, which he developed actually with a student of mine at Saybrook University, where one replaces images of a dismal future with images of a bright and happy future. And again, they work on this during the day. And instead of focusing on a traumatic past, they replace those memories with memories of a happy past. And instead of being so stuck that there's no happiness in the present, they try to make imagery of a happy present, something they can do right now that brings happiness. So time perspective therapy, that's the name of their book, spends a lot of time developing imagery, developing support groups, family advice, and artistic activities. And it even brings in a transpersonal element in terms of somebody projecting into an afterlife existence that is happy and pleasant. So, I think that's the best type of therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder survivors, and I bet that only one or two of you have heard of it. How many of you have heard of the Zimbardo book? Oh, congratulations. Probably heard about it yesterday when I did my workshop. Nonetheless, in the first dry run of the therapy, they had absolutely no suicides and no divorces after 3 years of time perspective therapy. And now they're rounding up funds to do other studies. It's not very popular with Veterans Administration, which has a vested interest in implosive therapy and in cognitive behavioral therapy, which are fine, but they don't work for everybody, and the long-term follow-up is not always very promising. So, the search is still on for good therapies to use for PTSD. One of the best therapies is the MDMA or ecstasy therapy, but that's so controversial. Only a few dozen PTSD veterans are allowed to use it in the United States, but all of them have had very salubrious results after only 1 or 2 sessions with MDMA. But, you know, it'll be decades before the Veterans Administration gets around to sanctioning that one. We're lucky that at least PTSD has been recognized and that at least something is being done for the handful of people who find a good therapist within the system and can work with them, and virtually none of those therapists know how to handle nightmares. So, in summary, there are three major answers to the question, does dream content have meaning? So, dream content, according to one perspective, is a random series of images, an epiphenomenon from the evolution of the brain. Dreams might serve a function as the brain prunes itself of useless material that need not be remembered. If so, dreams are better off forgotten. Now, this is what I was taught when I was in graduate school. And I remember that one of my instructors during our entire course on psychology of personality said, oh, by the way, one of the best indicators of schizophrenia is people that dream in color. And my fellow friends and I looked back and forth. We all dreamed in color. That meant that we were schizophrenic? Well, there was no excuse for making that statement because rapid eye movement sleep and its association with dreams was discovered back in the 1950s. Some teachers just do not keep up with the literature. So I think that perspective number one, which is still taught, sad to say, really does not hold up. Perspective number two, dream content represents the consolidation of memories, thus serves an evolutionary function. The period of non-REM sleep is most useful for consolidating non-emotional memories. Emotional memories are better consolidated during REM sleep, so there's even a division of function there. Because many of these memories are highly emotional, people may project meaning onto the dream. However, dream content itself has no inherent meaning. So there are a group of specialists today who say, yes, you can find meaning in dreams, and you can use that meaning therapeutically, but it's the meaning that the client and the therapist are projecting into this more or less random series of images which do represent activities during the day. Well, so this is shall we say, a projection. The problem is we can cite a number of studies that really undercut that. One of my favorite studies was a study done in Nigeria, where there are, as you know, many, many tribes, and some tribes are fairly well-to-do, some tribes are very, very poor. Dreams were collected from 3 different tribes. In one tribe, the tribe was very, very poor. People were starving. Now, according to Freud and wish fulfillment, you'd think that those people would be going to banquets in their dreams. No. Adler was right. There's a continuity between dream life and waking life. Those people had the least amount of food in their dreams, and they were starving even in their dreams. The second tribe was very affluent, and they had plenty to eat, so they had dreams that were filled with feasts and food. The third tribe was someplace in between, and they had dreams about food some of the time. So here again, dream life does reflect waking life. And you don't have to project meaning into the dreams because the dream is reflecting what actually happened in waking life. Now, I do think that the second perspective has a grain of truth in it. For this reason, there have been a few studies of people who go to therapists with different orientations. And in one study done several years ago, people who went to Freudian analysts actually began to dream in Freudian symbols. People who went to Jungian analysts usually started to dream about archetypes and Jungian symbols. Well, the basic life situation was the same, but the symbols that they created conformed to what they were used to doing in the psychotherapy session. Okay, now, the perspective number 3 is that dream content not only represents memory consolidation, but future planning, the processing of emotions, and problem solving, some of it highly creative in nature. As you might know, there have been great works of art, great inventions that have come out of dreams. There has been any number of movies coming out of dreams, many Fellini's movies, for example. One of Paul McCartney's songs came out of a dream. Many inventions came out of dreams. The cure for insulin came out of a dream. So sometimes the problem solving is very creative. Even if dreams are not recalled, they serve these functions. And if they are recalled, it's worthwhile mining them and for the meaning and putting the results to use in everyday life. Okay, now I'm just going to make a few final statements, and we'll still have time for a little bit of questions. So I've paid a little extra attention to post-traumatic stress disorder nightmares because I know many of you people work with trauma survivors. And as I say, this has to be dealt with in a little different way because you really want to change the nightmare. Other than that, if dreams are serving their ordinary purpose, there's no need to change them. Some people want to have lucid dreams. Well, there are techniques to be awake and aware during your dream if this is what you want, but then you can change the dream from the inside. Lucid dreaming has been taught to some PTSD survivors, and so they can actually change the dream from the inside, but lucid dreaming is a difficult skill to master. And you can do very well with some of the imagery rehearsal techniques that have you, if you're a PTSD survivor, work on that dream during the day and several times a day. And imagine putting different meaning into the dream, and putting different meaning into the dream will not change the traumatizing event, but it will change your reaction to the event and will help you move through the trauma. So, what about the use of dreams in psychotherapy? They're very rarely used in psychotherapy. You know, the days of Freud and Jung and Adler are long since gone, and there are pressures for time effectiveness in psychotherapy. But a researcher and a psychotherapist by the name of Clara Hill has developed a technique of integrating dreams into psychotherapy that works. And she has done extensive research, and people who go to therapists who work with dreams spend less time in therapy, they have more satisfaction in therapy, and they're more appreciative of the dream work. So, on all three scores, working with dreams in psychotherapy has been borne out by research. She has three stages. The client tells the dream and gives some immediate reaction in terms of the meaning of the dream. And then the therapist gives some reaction. For example, the therapist might use the technique we did yesterday in our workshop. If this were my dream, this is what it would mean. And then we move on to stage 2, and then the interpretation is decided upon by both the client and the therapist jointly. Now again, if it's a long dream, you're not going to cover all of the images. You focus on the emotion, the most intensive part of the dream, and you get the meaning of the dream, but then you move on to stage 3. And that's applying the learning in the therapy and into one's everyday life. And the next time the client comes in, the therapist says, all right, did you follow through with stage 3? Did you actually apply what you learned with dreams in your everyday life, and if so, how? And you can do this all within 15 minutes, 5 minutes per segment. You have to practice this to do it that efficiently, and then you spend the rest of the 50-minute hour attending to other aspects of the counseling or psychotherapy. Clara Hill's book, The Use of Dreams in Psychotherapy and Counseling, is published by American Psychological Association, by the way. So, there you have it. That's your short course of finding meaning in dreams. Thank you very much. So, now we do have time for a few questions, but I'm going to make the same offer that I made to the group yesterday. Anybody who has questions who would like to join me at lunch, we had 12 people in the back of the restaurant, and I was able to answer all of the questions that they didn't have a chance to answer during the session. I'll do the same thing today. If anybody wants to join me for lunch, just go to the back, the very, very back of the restaurant if you're eating at the restaurant. But now we'll have a time for a few questions right here. Who has something? Questions or comments? Okay. I am hard of hearing, so you're going to have to speak up or come up to the front.
I guess my basic question is, from a therapeutic standpoint, is do you pay attention to patterns of dreams and recurring dreams, or like a single dream? So in other words, I guess my question is kind of a recurring theme with a recurring dream more pregnant with meaning than a...
Yes, absolutely. That's an excellent question. Carl Jung said he preferred to work with collection of dreams, and that's why he had his clients use dream notebooks. We could go through the dream notebook and find what the recurring theme was, because of course this represents some issue that has not been worked through, and in recurring dreams this is front and center. If a dream recurs, it's begging for attention because it can't quite work its way through the system. It can't quite get integrated or get resolved. The problem can't quite be solved. The memory can't quite be consolidated without the missing pieces. The future cannot be planned for adequately without that being addressed. Yes, those are very important things for a therapist to look for if the therapist is working with dreams. Yes? Well, as I said before, one of the functions of dreams is planning for the future. And this was something that was very important back in the Paleolithic, and this is one of the adaptive functions of dreams, where they would plan for the future. They dream about the hunt, they dream about protecting themselves against enemies, they dream about local tribal politics, etc. And then this would impel them to action. Now, every once in a while, they had a dream that could not be explained in what we would say a rational way. They didn't think too much about it because that was their belief system. They were not locked into the Western belief system that the person ends when the skin ends. And the person cannot project him or herself into future or past. All we have is the here and the now. Many American Indian tribes, probably in Canada too, had the concept of the long body. No, the person does not end where the skin ends. The long body extends to include members of the family, members of the clan, members of the tribe, what happened in the past, what will happen in the future. A very, very different worldview. Now, we have a lot of people in the group who know a lot about social constructivism. Well, time is socially constructed. In the West, we have constructed time in a certain way. What if we're wrong? What if time is more extensive? What if time is serial? Then it would explain these puzzling precognitive dreams that we hear about, which sometimes are so specific that they really must be more than coincidental. There have been experiments on this, some I've done myself. There have been books on the topic. Of course, it's anathema to conventional psychology, but nevertheless it happens. Let's just say it's not necessarily a sign of mental illness, because I've known people who have this type of dream and they don't dare tell anybody because they think it's a sign that they're crazy. No, these dreams happen. And we don't know why they happen, but let's face it, there are still things in this world that we don't quite understand. Okay? Other questions? Oh my, we're going to have a problem. I would love to have your question, but I can't hear it. So would you come a little closer to the front?
Psychiatrists talked about the relationship between depression and sleep, and it now shows that sleep disturbance precedes depression instead of the other way around. Of course, it gave a very medical explanation. Sure. I'm wondering, in
Well, that's another good question, the relationship between sleep disorders and depression. I think that it can work either way. Sleep problems and insomnia can lead to depression because one is not getting enough dream time in, one is not processing emotions, especially the negative emotions that can lead to depression. One cannot adequately solve problems and one gets overwhelmed during the day and that leads to depression. So it can work that way. But if the depression has some other origin, then that interferes with a person's sleep because the initiator, the things that initiate the depression are going to show up in the dreams, maybe nightmares, and keep a person awake for much of the night. So it can work both ways, or it can work together. In fact, there are some therapists who will use medication to actually stop a person from having REM sleep if they're in deep depression for a short period of time until the depression starts to lift. That's a very radical way of doing things, but in psychotherapy, I believe in doing anything that works. And so this is something that a psychiatrist might actually consider. But you asked a very good question, and I would say, yeah, the psychiatrist was right, but with the addendum, it can also work the other way around. I think it can start both ways. You know, the mind and the body don't fit into the neat categories that we superimpose upon them. And the mind and the body don't have our point of view on cause and effect. Everything sort of happens all at once, and it's us who projects meaning and makes the dividing lines between past, present, future, cause and effect, and all those things. That's a good example of it. Okay, I think we have time maybe for one more quick question. Yes? Yeah, there are many other animals that have REM sleep. And again, this is part of the wonderful evolutionary process. And of course, we don't know exactly how this happened. So I'm going to give you a hypothetical example. Imagine little baby monkeys, and imagine that some had REM sleep and some didn't. The baby monkeys who had REM sleep would be of great concern to the mother, and the mother would pay them special attention, not understanding why those little monkey eyes were going back and forth while the babies were sleeping. What was happening to the other monkeys, the baby monkeys who didn't have REM sleep? The mother wouldn't pay close attention to them, and a predator might come, a vulture or a snake, and grab that baby out of the nest and take it off and gobble it, and those babies' genes would drop out of the gene pool. The REM monkeys based on their genes. So there you have it. Now, there have been some experiments with rats. Rats have REM sleep. And in one very clever experiment, the rats were taught to run mazes. And the experiments were able to find out what part of the brain was working when the rats ran the right maze and got the cheese at the end. During sleep and during REM sleep, that same part of the brain showed activity. So those little rat eyes going back and forth indicating a dream was going on were consolidating the memories, were rehearsing plans for the future so that they could get to the cheese more efficiently the next day. Yeah, so there you have the beginning of finding meaning in dreams and memory consolidation back with other primates. And who knows, maybe back further, but at least in the primate kingdom, you have dreams serving an adaptive purpose. Okay, any other questions? Come and join me at lunch or talk to me. I'll be here all day tomorrow. Catch me anytime. I always like to talk about dreams, and thank you very much for coming.
So thanks to Dr. Krippner for the talk, and we'll take a short break here, and I imagine they have to rearrange the rooms here.